Tsai Ing-wen has been engaged in academic fraud for 37 years now. Today, disproving Tsai Ing-wen's degree is no longer about evidence. It's now a game of politics. Why was a picture taken in Boston, USA labeled as a picture taken in London, England in Tsai's autobiography? Why is there no mention of Tsai Ing-wen's part-time tenure at Soochow University in 1983 in her public records? Neither Tsai Ing-wen nor the presidential office comments on these issues. Taiwan's media and political atmosphere are not morally strong enough to demand answers from Tsai either. On February 24, 2021, American independent journalist Michael Richardson secured a major win. The UK Administrative Court made a decision in Richardson's favor, saying that under the Freedom of Information Act, the Information Commissioner's Office had to respond to Richardson's inquiries about Tsai's external examiners before March 16th. Richardson had originally asked the ICO for the identities of Tsai Ing-wen's external examiners and other information regarding her degree. The Administrative Court overturned the Information Commissioner's decision, which said, "I consider it likely that disclosing this information would cause that individual a degree of damage or distress." After the decisive decision, however, the University of London applied for an extension on their deadline. It now has until March 24th to respond to Richardson's inquiries. Next week, we may find out how publicizing the identities of Tsai Ing-wen's examiners may result in her damage and distress. However, a few are worried that the conspirators behind this ruse have been prepared for this outcome. All they need to do is name people who are no longer around as Tsai's examiners. After all, people who are dead can't talk. Our viewers have nothing to worry about. Richardson's request for information goes far beyond the identity of Tsai's examiners. Richardson has also requested additional information that can help shine a light on the truth. The UK Administrative Court has already established legal precedent for the public nature of Tsai's degree. Anyone can now legally request information about Tsai's degree from the University of London, and the school would be obligated to provide that information. Even if the University of London somehow skirts revealing the identities of Tsai's external examiners, it still has to answer the following list of questions. Why did the Senate House Library never receive a copy of Tsai's thesis from external examiners? Why was there no name or signature on the memo Tsai publicized, which notified her that she passed her viva? Michael Elliott held only a bachelor's degree. He never published any academic papers. Despite this, was he still qualified to advise a PhD candidate? Furthermore, Elliott had left LSE by 1983. How was it possible he could advise Tsai even after he left the school? Can a student who WD from course and who hasn't paid tuition continue to study at LSE in following years? Where did the anonymous £480,000 donation gifted to Ms. Shi Fanglong at LSE's Taiwan research program come from? The University of London said it lost Tsai Ing-wen's thesis during one of the school library's various renovations between 1984 and 2010. When did the University of London realize the thesis went missing? Did it notify Tsai Ing-wen? What follow-up procedure was there? Did someone try to submit a version of Tsai's thesis to a school library in 2011? Why did the school reject the submission? In June 2015, a database entry for Tsai's thesis was created at the British Library. Under what procedure was this entry created? Who published the statements LSE released on October 8, 2019? Anyone familiar with ThesisGate knows that the answers the University of London gives in response to these questions will determine whether or not it's on the right side of history. Is the University of London willing to ante up like Tsai has, or will it finally start unveiling the truth? Taiwan and the London School of Economics and Political Science. There is much evidence to disprove the existence of Tsai's thesis. However, from the University of London's past actions, there is no reason to believe that it will tell the truth on March 24th. The school's Gaddafi and Sri Lanka scandals, as well as its employment of Pinsent Masons, all lead us to believe it will not take a truthful discourse. However, the University of London is not infallible in the academic circle. The Economic Journal documented significant academic publications that have earned their authors higher education degrees. Neither the 1983 to 1984 or the 1984 to 1985 edition of the Economic Journal mentions Tsai Ing-wen's thesis, unfair trade practices, and safeguard actions. Similarly, academic evidence disproving the existence of Tsai's thesis is abundant. In America, a group of scholars have been looking into Tsai's thesis from an academic point of view over the past year. At the beginning of 2021, this team in America has made many significant discoveries, and they have compiled their findings into an independent report. The investigative report contains rather decisive evidence. However, we are choosing to hold it in our hand for now, as we believe Tsai's organization knows nothing about it. Nonetheless, we hope the knowledge that this report exists will encourage the University of London to act righteously. Otherwise, it may also find itself in hot water in the post-pandemic world. Court proceedings in Taiwan are going smoothly as well. The High Court decided in Dr. Pang's favor and returned his case against Tsai Ing-wen to the district level to be retried. Tsai's lawyer did not appeal the decision, which is rather telling. Professor He Defen's administrative case against the Education Ministry opened once again on March 3rd. The courtroom had so many observers that Dr. Pang barely fit inside. The hearing started as usual. The judge recited the three major points of contention in the case. All eyes were on the Education Ministry to see how it would justify a classification period in excess of 30 years. However, the Education Ministry's lawyer did the unthinkable. When the judge asked for confirmation that the ministry refused to disclose Tsai Ing-wen's career files because the files were confidential, the lawyer responded in the negative. The Education Ministry's lawyer actually said Tsai's career files were never classified. You didn't hear that wrong. The lawyer said that the Education Ministry rejected Professor He Defen's request to see Tsai's career files because the ministry did not know which specific files she was talking about. The ministry was afraid that He was asking for sensitive information that could not be publicized. It turns out this was just one big misunderstanding. The reason why Tsai's files weren't provided was because of poor communication. The ministry just didn't know what Professor He wanted. Is this really the case? Since the beginning, the Education Ministry has been fighting a battle of asymmetrical information. First, it packaged Tsai Ing-wen's career files together with sensitive documents in order to selectively classify information. However, that sensitive information was created 30 years ago. Professor He argues what kind of confidential information can 30-year-old documents hold that is still relevant today? Things that couldn't be packaged with sensitive information, like diplomas and resumes, were protected under the guise of personal information laws. Nothing could be made public. That's the story the Education Ministry stuck to.
那为什么我之前要小英总统出任副教授跟升等教授的相关资料的时候，你可以在2篇，包括138年12月30号才能解密的，你马上就可以解密给我。部长，我要跟你讲一个笑话。是当我跟你要那个7月19号你给我的资料的时候，是总统府同时公布说，总统的升等论文找到了，在哪里可以收到？你知道吗？你们是同步作业，一边给我资料，一边教育部开记者会，一边总统府提供资料，是因为你们准备好了，所以给了我。所以不管有没有机密，你都给我。
跟委员报告哈，因为校审资料哈，在部里面的档案资料保存，我们都是用密件。
委员，这个如果涉及个资，就是应该要遵守个资来调，因为委员有质询跟教育部也有维护即使是总统的个资权利啦。
If the Education Ministry could provide then legislator Apollo Chen with Tsai's files, which were said to be confidential, then how can its lawyer claim the files weren't classified in court? The Education Ministry gave Apollo Chen original confidential files that were supposed to be classified until 2049. Furthermore, those files had a classification period that exceeded 30 years. The maximum duration a file is allowed to be kept confidential under national law. The Education Ministry deviously took Tsai's career files and attached them to sensitive information meant for classification. That's what the Education Ministry wanted the public to believe it was doing over the past 2 years. However, the legality of such classification methods is questionable. That's why the Education Ministry didn't dare draw attention to the confidential files at all. The ministry lawyer was better off saying the files weren't confidential. If the ministry insisted on the confidentiality of the files, then it would have revealed that it violated Article 27 of the Classified National Security Information Protection Act, which states, quote, "Upon reaching the date of declassification, classified information shall be automatically declassified," unquote. According to what Zhu Junzang said, Tsai Ing-wen's files should have been classified on August 1st, 1984 for 30 years. Meaning the files should have been declassified automatically in 2014. Because of classification duration restrictions, it's obvious that Tsai's files were not made confidential in 1984. That's why the Education Ministry was able to classify said files on July 19, 2019 until December 31st, 2049. It lied to the people and allowed Tsai Ing-wen to keep her career information a secret for even longer. However, on March 3rd, the Education Ministry gave up on this explanation entirely. So, if Tsai's files weren't classified, then why did Zhu Junzang say they were during a hearing?
这个部分刚刚特别回应委员提到的有关保密的一个相关规定，我们在处理教师送审资料，我们是依照教师资格审定办法规定，要进行保密。那我们援引的法规是行政院文书处理手册里面有关一般公务机密的规定。那一般公务机密，它有涉及到行政运作以及个人安全隐私的资料是可以持续的做保密，所以我们过去其实超过30年，30年保密时间到，其实我们是在续予保密，所以我们针对送审资料都持续保密当中。
Every classified document has a classification period. The manual that Zhu said grants administrative procedure to classify documents is merely a guideline for properly storing administrative files. It simply instructs governmental bodies and civil servants on how to store, use, and process government files. It is intended for internal use and guidance. It does not allow for classification in the same way the Information Protection Act does. Zhu blatantly muddled the lines between organizational protocol and law. Article 52 of the manual itself states that all governmental organizations should classify documents as needed under relevant laws. Any confidential document needs to have its classification grounded in law. There is no way guidelines in a manual are enough to classify documents.
那我们援引的法规是行政院文书处理手册里面有关一般公务机密的规定。那一般公务机密，它有涉及到行政运作以及个人安全隐私的资料是可以持续的做保密。
Now, it's easy to understand why the Education Ministry's lawyer had to say Tsai's files weren't confidential. It's because everything that Zhu said regarding their classification was flagrantly unlawful. Therefore, since none of Tsai's information was really confidential, the Education Ministry could selectively publicize what it wanted. At the same time, if the files weren't confidential, then how could the ministry go about redacting information in them as it saw fit?
按照我们的公文文书处理，我们经过行政的判断之后，我们去做适当的隐匿，把它相关可能涉及到个人个资的
同意可以公开的。
这我们是经过我们内部的行政的程序。
最后签字是谁？
我们是经过内部行政程序啦，不好意思，
都不敢讲。
The Education Ministry completely ignored administrative protocol. There is nothing in the Cabinet's manual that says institutions can conceal information. If the file isn't classified, then it has to abide by Article 11 of the Information Protection Act, which says the file has to be publicized in full. The Education Ministry got its hands dirty trying to play cover-up. Another crutch the Education Ministry relied on throughout this con is the Personal Data Protection Act. It emphasizes that the president is entitled to personal information protection.
对啊，这个如果涉及个资，就是应该要遵守个资来调，因为委员有质询跟教育部也有维护即使是总统的个资权利啦。
Even so, according to Article 16 of the Personal Data Protection Act, a government agency shall use personal data only within the necessary scope of its statutory duties and for the specific purpose of collection. The use of personal data for another purpose shall be only on any of the following bases. The sixth special case specifies where it is for the data subject's rights and interests. Publicizing Tsai's files would most definitely be in her interest, as it could help liberate her from ThesisGate accusations. The seventh special case under Article 16 is where consent has been given by the subject. The courts have twice asked the Education Ministry whether it has asked for Tsai's consent. It has so far dodged the question and said it needs 90 days in order to respond. Resumes and diplomas are private information. If the involved party agrees, then the Education Ministry will respect their decision. The Education Ministry has already gone against administrative protocol by classifying files without first asking Tsai for consent. Has the Education Ministry been sleeping this entire time? The courts have taken away the Education Ministry's ability to hide behind information protection and personal data laws. Whether it's hiding behind national protection or private information laws, the Education Ministry's actions are unlawful. That's why the ministry says the sensitive information is what's classified. It no longer insists that it can't share Tsai's information because the information is confidential. However, the Education Ministry also told the court that it does not have Tsai's resume or proof of her degree because relevant laws back then did not require the Education Ministry to keep copies of such information. The Education Ministry flagrantly contradicts itself. First, it publicizes certain information proving Tsai's time as a university instructor. Then, when it comes to other pieces of information, it either says it doesn't have it, it discarded it, or it requires people to apply for it once again. The ministry is doing whatever it can to not be the loose end that undoes Tsai's massive ploy. The Education Ministry has been tampering with information since day one. It continues to do what it can to conceal information that could be detrimental to its cause, like Tsai's time at Soochow University in 1983. Even so, Professor He Defeng has nearly 40 years of experience at National Taiwan University's College of Law. She insists that the Education Ministry needs to abide by administrative protocol. If files don't have a proper reason to be classified, then those files should be made public. To He, this is a battle of integrity and ethical operation. Another question the judge asked the Education Ministry's lawyer is if the ministry had proof that the thesis was indeed written in the 1980s. The Education Ministry said that it would forward details to the court at a later date. However, the lawyer did say that the thesis was featured in an NCCU legal journal from June 1983, as well as at academic seminars on international trade. The ministry's lawyer must be mistaken. According to the presidential office, Tsai Ing-wen had just submitted her thesis in June 1983. At that point, she probably didn't even have a Viva date yet. How could Tsai's thesis have been featured in an NCCU legal journal? Never mind the fact that the NCCU legal journal is a Chinese publication, while Tsai's thesis should have been written in English. Does the Education Ministry's lawyer realize what he said? It seems that the presidential office and the Education Ministry can't get their stories straight. Not only can't they prove Tsai's thesis originated from the 1980s, but they also revealed that she was fraudulently passing herself off as a PhD by June 1983. The Education Ministry has two vastly differing attitudes inside and outside of the courtrooms. During hearings and press conferences, education officials are willing to distort the truth and vouch for Tsai. However, as soon as it enters the courtroom, the Education Ministry pushes responsibility onto Tsai and makes the central issue about private information. The ministry is careful about what legal responsibility it incurs. The same thing is happening at the National Central Library. In September 2020, a loyal viewer of ours wrote to the Library Director General Zheng Suxian and asked her to remove Tsai's error-riddled thesis from the institution's shelves. The library responded to that viewer and said, 1. An author must sign an affidavit attesting to the legitimacy of any work submitted to the library. They must also provide a digital copy and take responsibility for the authenticity of their work. 2. The library will remove any work if the school that issued the degree cancels the author's credentials. Like the Education Ministry, the library has put all of the responsibility on Tsai Ing-wen. In order to mitigate any legal damage a false thesis might bring, our lawyers Li Zhenhua and Zhang Jing also sent letters to the library requesting that it remove Tsai Ing-wen's fraudulent thesis. The library once again put all the responsibility on Tsai. The library said its purpose was to store, collect, and compile information. It said it accepts records and volumes as is donated by submitters. It does not make any further evaluation beyond that. The library then said if there are any uncertainties as to the contents of a certain submission, then we should inquire with the school that first issued the work. The library no longer insists that the thesis was a proper and legal thesis, but rather a volume submitted by a third party. It then deflected questions about the book's legitimacy to the London School of Economics. The thesis is now just a volume. Confidential files are now no longer classified. It looks like the Education Ministry and the Central Library are coming to terms with reality. However, that doesn't undo the damage that has been done to Taiwan's administrative systems. Morally compromised officials continue to play politics with a thesis, all because they don't want to be the final, detrimental piece of the puzzle that costs Tsai Ing-wen her lie. The truth behind Tsai's thesis is imminent. It's only a matter of time. ThesisGate is the first movement in a political revolution that will wash over Taiwan.